morning, everybody. Welcome to another live episode of The Breakdown. It is January 14th, 2023. I'm your host, Nate Pike. We have so very much to talk about. We actually had to cut some stuff out of this episode. We wanted to talk about the clearing out of the homeless encampments in Edmonton, but we're going to push that to next week because there's an announcement coming tomorrow from the Edmonton mayor that will likely make things even more dynamic in the relationship between the municipal politics and the provincial politics. Plus, we're in the process of hopefully lining up an interview that's going to be very insightful in regards to the whole situation and maybe able to express a little bit better than this middle-aged white dude can why people don't want to go stay in some of the shelter beds that are available. Let's say it that way. So we're hoping to be presenting that interview fairly quickly here. We had a couple other things that we wanted to talk about, but there's just so much. We're also not going to be talking tonight about, our lights are on, so we're doing great, but we're not going to be talking about the power situations that the province of Alberta saw over the weekend. There's been a couple of days now where, due to the extreme cold as well as a lack of wind and some other things, there's been some warnings. People's phones made the scary noises. That's still in the process of getting sorted out as well, and we are neither economists nor lightning wielders. So we're gonna give it a little bit of time to percolate, and then we'll try to make some sense of that in the next week's episode as well. So we already got a lot of stuff that we're going to be carrying forward to next week, but we have things that we gotta talk about tonight, and we're gonna start with a little story about our first chunk of the show. Is going to be dedicated to healthcare. And we're going to start with a conversation about EMS and paramedics. Anybody who listens to the show knows what's coming next. Disclaimer. I work professionally as a paramedic. I disclose that so there's no accusations of bias, because I am super biased. But want to be very clear, speaking only for myself and the show, not speaking for any organizations that I may or may not be affiliated with. That being said, let's get right into it. News story came out on January 8th. And it's pretty stark. It paints a pretty stark picture of what's going on for emergency medical services in the province of Alberta. The headline, are you ready to go back? There's more calls waiting. Alberta EMS workers are burnt out, paramedic says. Now, this whole story is based off of information that's been provided by a Calgary area paramedic named Ryan Middleton. We've had Ryan on the show before to talk about some of the FOIPs that he's done in regards to the EMS crisis in Alberta. Now, Daniel Smith likes to say all the time, we fixed it. We did the 45-minute thing, and paramedics are getting back onto the street, and everything's fine. But as Mr. Middleton points out, that's not entirely the case. January 8th story from City News. Don't want to miscredit it. It's on the screen. City News detailed that in the Calgary zone, 64 vacant shifts were highlighted on Christmas Day, followed by another 53 vacant shifts on New Year's Eve. Now, that's a lot of ambulances that don't have paramedics to drive to them or to respond to calls. But it's really important I want to give, in particular, Mr. Middleton a bit of a shout out here, because not only has he managed to grow a fine, a little bit of it's not Movember anymore, but he's got himself some facial hair going on there. It's pretty fly, pretty Princess Guidey. You gotta like it. Princess Bride. Man, I'm tripping over the jokes already. It's going to be a hell of a show, folks. Mr. Middleton has done a lot of work to raise awareness. And there's a quote from this story that I want to read because it really kind of speaks to the frustration, I think, that a lot of people in EMS and in the healthcare profession in general, but particularly for EMS and first responders, are experiencing. Here's the quote. I don't know any other jobs where you may have to go to work and encircle your hands around the torso of an infant trying to revive them. And you're only earning $3 more an hour than you were 8 years ago when you had to do it for the first time. Keep someone alive long enough to get them to a hospital, explain to someone in an emergency department that the person in the same car has been decapitated, and then you have 2 minutes to find a coffee and a washroom before you're being asked on a cell phone, "Are you ready to go back? There's more calls waiting," he said. So very clearly, that's where the headline of the story came from. And it's pretty stark. If you've been working in the same profession, and it's the high stakes profession that is healthcare, and in particular EMS, $3 in 8 years is not great. It's not. Just no getting around that. Now, it's very clear in the story that he does this conversation and participated in the story that he did with City News as a patient advocate, not as an employee of Alberta Health Services. So just to be crystal clear, I'm reading this story as a podcast host, not as an employee of Alberta Health Services. Moving on from there. Cuts coming to healthcare. With the healthcare crisis going, you'd think one of the last things that you'd want to see would be cuts to healthcare, but you'd be wrong. You'd be so wrong, because there's been some edicts that have been issued. There's been some declarations that have been made, and the United Nurses of Alberta are raising the alarm over an internal memo from Alberta Health Services Acting Chief Financial Officer Michael Lamb, instructing the province-wide healthcare agency senior leaders to reduce the use of overtime and agency staffing by at least 10%. So, to be clear, what they're talking about is they don't want to use external nursing agencies. It's been a fairly regular practice for a fairly long amount of time to use external agencies to bring in people, and it does cost more, but the people come in and do the nursing things. That's been going on for quite some time. And the edict has come down that that's to be decreased by at least 10%. The edict has also come down that overtime is to be decreased by at least 10%. Now, all of this goes on as many of the conversations that have been going on around the healthcare system and the ongoing healthcare crisis are centered around the idea there's just not enough people to do the things. So if there's not enough people to do the things from a regular staffing level, your choices are bringing people up on overtime, hire external agencies, or don't have those positions staffed, which is part of the problem in the healthcare system. Even with overtime being available and even with external agencies being utilized, there's still lots of shifts that aren't getting filled. But that's not all that this particular declaration has brought about. The United Nurses of Alberta also included the internal memo, the document. And this isn't the only cost-cutting measure that's taking place. Also included is any discretionary spending, which apparently includes travel for non-clinical purposes, purchases of non-clinical equipment, including any office supplies, consultant engagements, working sessions, or any education, which is, why would we want the healthcare workers to learn the newest healthcare things? I don't really know what to do with that last section of the memo, but nonetheless, that's the mandate that has been put out there, and the United Nurses of Alberta was calling it out really quite strongly, emphasizing that they believe that it's going to cause significant risks to patients and patient outcomes. Moving on from there, one of the things the UCP has promised that they were going to do for basically since they were a thing, was that one of the big mandates, they got a whole ministry for it. They're going to cut red tape, except in Red Deer, it appears they're putting it up quite literally in emergency rooms. On January 5th, Red Deer made the news because their hospital, which is pretty much always over capacity. This is the Red Deer Hospital, and the capacity issues at the Red Deer Hospital have been going on for years and years and years and years. So to be really, really clear, the capacity issues in Red Deer have been a problem that multiple successive governments have known about and haven't done, let's go with, enough about, because the problems continue to persist. Well, over the last couple of weeks, they've apparently gotten to the point where makeshift treatment spaces were thrown together using tarps and duct tape. But that's not all that's been going on in Red Deer, because early in the week, we got a couple of DMs about the MRI thing that we threw out on the social medias. The DMs, there's two of them. Hey, I thought you might be interested in this. My friend admitted to the Red Deer Regional Hospital where she needed to get an MRI and was told they don't have any working and are currently sending them meaning patients, to Edmonton or Calgary for an MRI. Got a second one a couple hours after we posted the first one, can most certainly confirm the MRI stories about Red Deer. And it wasn't long after that the news picked it up as well. And a story broke, again, in the Red Deer news. And I just got to say, the folks at the Red Deer News now do not get enough credit. Because, they're killing it with the journalism that they're doing up there. Everybody should send them Cadbury eggs or something, because they deserve a little treat. Perhaps a Kit Kat. But the Red Deer Hospital, their MRI machine was confirmed to be out of service. And they included a picture of the tarps and the red tape. And I just love that it's red tape. The jokes write themselves. They have been on our social media for the last 4 or 5 days. But the second, this news story talked about the fact that for a period of 2 to 3 days, the MRI machine in Red Deer went down due to an unexpected issue with a component that needed repair over the weekend. Patients were instead shipped to Calgary or Edmonton. Now, this next bit gets to be important for some of the things that we're going to talk about as we go, because we've got some issues that we have to address that are coming up, particularly with our very next thing that we're going to talk about. But how much? One of the questions that came up on the social media was, how much does a new MRI cost? And it turns out there's some variables. So if we really wanted to get a good idea of how much an MRI cost, we should probably look at a recent installation, because it turns out when you buy an MRI, you're not just buying the machine. Because as many TV shows have made very good hay out of, when you buy an MRI, you're essentially buying a giant magnet. And the problem with that giant magnet is, unless it's in the right kind of environment, it can cause all kinds of problems. So you're not just buying the machine, you're buying the room that you're putting the machine into. And that room has to be customized to basically turn into a giant Faraday cage. It's not cheap. Medicine Hat did it just recently, though. And we took a look at how much it costs to install not just the machine, but the room as well. And for Medicine Hat to put in all of the infrastructure needed for the machine and the machine, it cost $3.5 million. It's not cheap. But it's cheaper than perhaps some things. Like, I don't know, knockoff children's medication. There were some stories that broke this week about the Atabay meds. And you know what? To introduce this segment, to really set the tone for this segment, we're going to briefly, for a couple of seconds, turn it over to the Premier of the province, Danielle Smith. Calamity. I love that clip. That you can't get that clip anywhere. You can't just go to the Government of Alberta YouTube and get that clip, because that's the clip from the start of the press conference where Danielle Smith announced that she was going to be spending, depending on whose figures, $80 to $100 million of taxpayers' money to get a company that didn't actually make the meds to make the meds, and that company's in Turkey and it belongs to Dr. Oz's mom's family. It turns into a whole thing real quick. But at the very beginning of that press conference, Danielle Smith walked on to the podium. Wait for it. She walked onto the podium, and then she just about knocked over the lectern. And we're making that distinction because we got schooled by an international Twitter account called Not a Podium when we called the lectern a podium. So we've learned our lesson. It's like ophthalmologists. We learned the lesson on that one too. We're open to correction here at the Breakdown. But the funny part is they did that press conference. They live streamed it. Normally when the live stream goes up, it's available on the Government of Alberta's YouTube right away. But they deleted the live stream and then they posted an edited version of the press conference without that, calamity, dagger eyes, at the beginning, which is just all kinds of fun. We still have that clip and we will. It goes in our favorite clips file. But let's go all the way back to December 6th, that initial announcement. Province of Alberta was going to buy 5 million bottles of children's medicine for fever and pain at a cost of $80 million at least. Medications were being bought by a company called Atabay Pharmaceuticals out of Turkey. And the company that Atabay, the company, they tend to make more of the precursors. So they make the ingredients, but they don't make the actual meds in the formulation that Alberta was looking for. And they also didn't send them to Canada historically. So there was some approvals and some other things that needed to happen right out of the gates. Daniel Smith at the press conference and Jason Copping at the press conference, well, it's all good. Health Canada is going to approve this stuff. We're going to get it. It's going to be so fast. And they made some pretty big promises, some bold promises about what was going to happen. This is from that press conference release on that very first day. The quick facts: the medication will be manufactured at a Health Canada approved facility overseas. They had to get that approval. So packaging will follow Health Canada guidelines. It didn't. The retail cost to the consumer will be in line with the average cost for this type of medication. It kind of sort of was, but only because the taxpayers heavily subsidized it. Drugs imported to Canada must meet safety, quality, and efficacy regulations set out by Health Canada in order to be authorized for import. And there were problems there too. So all the promises that were made right out of the gates about how wonderful all of these drugs were going to be and the high standards that they were going to meet, they went by the wayside pretty quick. The first shipment was on January 18th. It was 250,000 bottles of acetaminophen, or Tylenol, or Tylenot, as the Turkish meds colloquially became referred to. It was approved only for hospital use, as it did not have child-resistant caps or the required labeling. So 250,000 bottles of this Tylenot were received by the province of Alberta. And then it was promptly said, hey, because you guys don't have the child-proof caps and because you don't have the correct labeling, you can't just put this out there for consumers. And the government responded by saying, that's okay, we'll use it in hospitals. Except one of the things that's happened over the last year is it's since been revealed that only 9,000 bottles were ever shipped to hospital pharmacies for use in hospitals. But that was just the very, very, very start of the problems with the Atabay Tylenot. There was, after that shipment was received, a warning notice was put out regarding weaker dosing, which forced the product to be kept behind counters. So the formulation that was provided is actually a weaker formulation than the standard formulation that was used all the way across Canada. And because of that inconsistency, because parents were going to have to go a different route, they were going to have to measure things differently than what they were used to, it was required that the Atabay drugs be kept behind the counter of the pharmacies when they did actually go out for sale, so that parents could be educated the correct way and the correct amount of this medication to administer. So right out of the gates there, we've got another problem. That first supply en route to the pharmacies went out in or around March 20th. It was sold for $11.99 a bottle. But as I said earlier, that was heavily subsidized by taxpayers because taxpayers paid $14 a bottle to buy the stuff. So right out of the gates, taxpayers are subsidizing $2 and a little bit I don't think you can buy gummy bears for a penny anymore, but $2.01 for the Tylenol. But where it gets really unfortunate and ugly, given that this whole thing was announced as being in response to a shortage. I mean, there were reports coming out of Alberta in January and February that the shortage had resolved, that there was this medication, the children's medication, was back on the shelves at pharmacies. But in March, the province shipped out all of the children's Tylenol to deal with the crisis, and they shipped out across the entire province 4,700 bottles. That's it. There were a grand total of 13,700 bottles that were ever deployed or sent out. Both, and that's both hospitals and regular pharmacies where families could go to buy the medicine if they wanted to do a class with their pharmacist. This week it got even worse, though, because the Globe and Mail released a story where they talked about the fact that it's bad for little ones. So officials, the story was released on January 10th. The imported medication, which is thicker than products typically used by AHS, clogged feeding tubes used to deliver medicine to fragile patients in some instances. Tubes then had to be flushed with water. Officials determined the higher volume of liquid increased the risk of complications called necrotizing enterocolitis, which inflames the intestines of infants. Staff were subsequently ordered to stop using the product in neonatal intensive care units in May. And then in July of 2023, AHS orders hospitals to stop using completely. In September of 2023, the province announced one of the pitches that Danielle Smith offered up to Albertans in order to justify this $80 million spend on meds from a company that didn't make the meds in that way before, that was previously owned by Dr. Oz's mom. That just never gets old. One of the justifications was, it's cool, though. There's this massive shortage. We're going to get all of this stuff super fast. It's just going to be the best stuff. And so all of the other provinces will want to buy it. We'll be able to sell it to other provinces, and we'll make back our money. Everybody wins. It's like the best get-rich-quick scheme, except it's like every get-rich-quick scheme, because it didn't take very long for other provinces to go, wait, you screwed up the dosing, and the crisis is over, and it costs a lot of money. Why would we want to buy your Tylenot when we can just buy Tylenol? So in September of 2023, provinces announced no further attempts to sell after no provinces expressed interest, and most provinces explicitly said, we don't want anything to do with that. On October 26th of 2023, there was another Globe article that detailed that Health Canada will not approve any further shipments. So because this was brought in under emergency circumstances only, there's no more shipments coming, which means roughly 3.5 million bottles at $14 a bottle are just never going to happen. But reportedly, we paid the $80 million up front because reasons, I guess. So somewhere it appears a get-rich-quick scheme worked for somebody. Now, AHS, there's questions that we got to say here. Okay? Because this is getting complicated. The Globe story talked about how if you give this product through feeding tubes to infants in a NICU, it causes problems with the feeding tube, it clogs things up, and then they got to flush it, and then there's a higher volume of water, and it can cause this necrotizing enteritis condition. And anytime you see the words necrotizing, run fast is sort of the general rule, because that literally means that the flesh is just dying. The tissue is just dying. So it's not great to see necrotizing, especially not great to see it when we're talking about the insides of vulnerable infants. But it didn't take very long for one of our amazing Twitter followers to point out, wait a second, why was it being given to NICU patients? Because if you actually take a look at the Government of Canada approvals, what was approved for importation, so there was the Pedifen, which is the ibuprofen, the Motrin, the Advil version of things. The Pedifen was approved, but it was approved for children 2 to 11 years old. The parole, or payroll, as we like to refer to it colloquially here on the show, which is the Tylenol, the paracetamol, the Tylenot, that was also approved for children 2 to 11 years old. So all of the records of the approvals that we could find show that the medication was approved for children 2 to 11 years old. But it's almost as if somebody said to Alberta Health Services, hey, you're going to stop using the Tylenol. We're going to start using all of the payroll and the Pedifen, and it'll be fine. It's almost as if when you introduce a new medication in a new formulation that hasn't been appropriately field tested, that was thrown together because of the whim of a politician who wanted to do nothing more than to own the federal government and try to make them look bad, and at the same time leverage Albertans' healthcare, particularly Albertans' children's healthcare, against the federal government. It's almost as if there's unforeseen negative consequences when you fuck around like that. Because there are. And it appears on its face that this is just one example of that. Now, Alberta Health Services did issue a statement where they were very, very clear that while there were some adverse incidents, they also were very, very clear that an adverse incident can be defined as a great many different things. To read from the statement, the medication was approved for import by Health Canada, and no patients, including infants requiring neonatal intensive care, were injured or fell ill as a result of its use. So it seems to be a tacit admission right there that, in fact, the medication was used on infants requiring neonatal intensive care, despite the fact that it was only approved for ages 2 to 11. Do with that what you will. I'm just reading the two statements that are publicly available here, not speaking for anyone but myself. The decision to stop using the imported pain medication in our NICUs. So again, we're just straight up saying it was being used in the NICUs, was made after frontline staff found that the imported product had a higher risk of clogging feeding tubes due to a higher viscosity. In healthcare, the terminology adverse reaction does not mean patients were injured. In this case, adverse reactions included not tolerating the taste of the imported medication or the volume. Technically, the need for what might otherwise be an unnecessary procedure, replacing a feeding tube, also requires as an adverse event. Instances where product packaging and labeling can be misapprehended can also qualify as an adverse event. The Atabay product was used in AHS sites for approximately 2 months before staff reverted back to their usual medication. So, it seems pretty clear that, yeah, the medication was used on infants in a neonatal intensive care unit setting. We don't know how to square that with the Health Canada approval for ages 2 to 11, because 2 is pretty far past neonatal. We Googled it. So do with that what you will. But at the end of the day, the total costs of this vanity exercise, estimates are at least $80 million to $100 million. But even if we go with the low end, even if we go with the $80 million number, that could have been 23 new MRI suites across the province. That could have put 23 new MRIs, not just the machines, but the rooms as well, across the entire province. And one could think, if you're dropping 23 MRIs across the province, not only would you improve the quality of healthcare, not only would you improve the access to MRIs, whose waiting lists are kind of legendary in this province, but you'd actually have something to show for it. Moving on from there. Let's talk about an actual safe supply conversation, because clearly the stuff we just talked about maybe wasn't so much. We see the UCP government regularly talking about, you know what? There's this, hey, keep talking about the safe supply. That's just a pipe dream, that is. There's no such thing as safe supply. It doesn't exist. It's all just giving people poison, even though safe supply works on the assumption that you're providing the same medication, grade medication that people receive in hospitals, because fentanyl is used in hospitals and procedures all the time. So it's not actually poison if you're giving it to people in hospitals. Not saying, just saying. But the UCP said, you know, we saw Jeremy Nixon, candidate for federal stuff here in Calgary. The riding's name escapes me. I'm sure somebody will throw it into the chat. Jeremy Nixon, he put up a thing. You know, I was on the Safe Supply Research Committee that we did here in Alberta, and we couldn't find any evidence. It's just, there's no evidence, except unless you read the British Medical Journal, which is the publication that's put out exclusively by the British Medical Association. So when you're talking about high quality evidence, it's really, really hard to find anything much more objective or better, because they did an entire study on the impacts of safe supply. Now, there's going to be some people, I'm sure, that say, oh, wait, that's Britain. They're different. They call their stuff chips instead of French fries. They have questionable dental records, like their history with dental stuff isn't so great, and they have this propensity for producing talk show hosts that just go on they host American talk shows, and that's really all that it is that's all that it is, except that's not all that it is, because the study was actually done in British Columbia. This is a study that was done in Canada. It was done in British Columbia, and it looked primarily at two things. It looked at, hey, if we provide a safe supply of opiates, do we save lives? It also looked at, hey, if we supply a safe supply of stimulants, do we save lives? And the answers are pretty conclusive. Opioid dispensations were associated with reduced overdose-related and all-cause mortality among a sample of people with opioid use disorder. Pharmaceutical alternatives to the illegal drug supply are promising interventions to reduce mortality in people with opioid use disorder. So what this study found empirically was that for people who suffer from opioid use disorder, or they use opioids, they use drugs like fentanyl or morphine or hydromorph or heroin or. For people who are using those drugs and they're getting supply from the streets, not only does providing safe supply prevent them from overdosing from that stuff, but they actually die less from all of the other things. Now, in fairness, and probably predictably, they also found that a safe supply of stimulants doesn't show the same results. That probably doesn't shock anyone who's familiar with the opioid crisis. When people overdose from stimulants, they make poor life choices, let's go with. When people overdose from opioids, they stop breathing. And by ensuring people know what they're getting and the quantity that they're getting, they overdose less and die less. But what it also found is that people who were accessing safe supply also accessed other services more consistently. It's almost as if the same data that exists for supervised consumption sites applies to safe supply. They both save lives. They both divert people into other programs that help them get treatment and get supports. Again, this is coming from the British Medical Journal. This is the highest standard that exists in Britain. It's based on a study that was done in Canada, one province over, that this provincial government loves to use as an example of here's everything that's going wrong over and over and over again. Well, if you're going to use data from BC, then you have to use data from BC. And the data from BC overwhelmingly demonstrates that safe supply saves lives. And if you're uncomfortable with the concept, you're putting your discomfort ahead of other people's lives. That's just the reality. Moving on from there, we're going to do a special little, we're doing 2 deep dives tonight. We're going to do our first deep dive. We're going to be talking about Alberta's oil and gas. And then our second deep dive, we're talking about our FOIP that we got back this week that we're still really quite excited about. But first, let's talk about fracking. There's a lot of people who hear the word fracking and they know that it's an oil and gas thing. And there's a lot of people who have a lot of different misconceptions. They have some confusion in regards to what is fracking. Is it actually bad? Does it actually cause earthquakes? And fortunately, here in the province of Alberta, we have something called the Alberta Energy Regulator, the AER. And a little while back, they did some educational videos on fracking.
How is natural gas extracted, and is it safe? He is about to have a conversation with Michelle, who works for the AER as a geologist or a rock expert. It's so nice to warm up and enjoy a conversation that really matters.
Isn't it? Isn't it nice to just warm up and enjoy a conversation that really matters right beside the natural gas fireplace? Oh, look how well that was placed in that little animation. Keith and Michelle, tell us all about the fracking.
Horizontal wells are drilled thousands of meters below the surface and far beyond groundwater before turning horizontally and continuing on for another 1.5 kilometers or even more. Once the well is drilled, fluids are pumped into the well to create enough pressure deep underground to crack the rock, allowing the oil or gas to flow. The fluids usually have a proppant, like sand, that helps keep the cracks open to allow the oil and gas to flow to the well. The fracturing that takes place at multiple locations along the horizontal wells is called multi-stage fracturing.
So that's what fracking is, in a nutshell. You're pumping the water at very, very high pressures to break apart the rock to get the oil and the gas out. I feel like, though, I feel like maybe Keith has some more questions. Let's find out together.
Says that he has more questions about hydraulic fracturing, like, does it cause earthquakes, pollute our water, and create noise and dust? And is the AER doing anything to address these concerns? Michelle tells Keith that all energy development, like any other industrial activity, has impacts. In one area of Alberta, just west of a town called Fox Creek, scientists recorded 3 earthquakes measuring over 4.0 in the Richter scale over a 1-year period. Keith asks, how do we know if they were man-made or natural earthquakes? Through extensive research, seismologists determined there was a link between these earthquakes and hydraulic fracturing activity in the area. That hydraulic fracturing, in fact, caused old faults to slip again as an earthquake.
Oh, sorry. I thought I was on hold. That music is just so chill. So there it is. That's what fracking is. And yes, there's the Alberta Energy Regulator. Man, words are hard tonight. I don't know what's going on with me. The Alberta Energy Regulator saying, yeah, absolutely, fracking can cause earthquakes. If it happens in vulnerable areas, you can trigger an earthquake. If it happens in the area of a fault line, you can trigger an earthquake. It's something that we pay very close attention to because we don't want to trigger earthquakes near, I don't know, essential infrastructure or anything like that, which brings us to the Brazeau Damn. Right there. That's the Brazeau Damn. You can see it's kind of sitting underneath that dirt rockish wall there. It's not what you might envision as being a regular dam. It's a dam that's owned, operated by TransAlta, and is one of the fairly rare in this province hydroelectric power producers in Alberta. It was built to hold water and generate power, but one thing it wasn't built for is to withstand earthquakes, because where it is in Alberta, you don't typically, historically, see earthquakes, except now you kind of sort of do. And because of the not earthquake-proof nature of this dam, the AER has actually put an exclusion zone around the dam. You're not allowed to frack within 5 kilometers of the dam. Now, why is this so important? Well, because the dam holds back a lot of water. The reservoir that sits behind the dam is actually 25 kilometers long. Sorry, 20 kilometers long. It's a big reservoir, holds a lot of water. But it's also where it connects to that's of particular importance to understand because it actually hooks right up to the Saskatchewan River, North Saskatchewan River in particular. And if this dam was to burst because of an earthquake, you're talking about a massive amount of water being released into the Saskatchewan River that would not only flow through areas like Rocky Mountain House, but it would flow right through the middle of Edmonton and all the way into Saskatchewan. So the moral of the story is, if this dam goes, it's going to create a lot of unintended consequences. In fact, so much so, we didn't have the chance to put the graphic together for tonight, but if you go on the website for TransAlta on the Twitter machine, if you go to their social media, you'll see an announcement from them that's saying because of the power shortages that we've experienced in the province of Alberta, they're going to be opening up the flow on a lot of their hydroelectric dams along the North Saskatchewan River. And to be extra careful in that area because of the ice flows and because of the increased volume of water that they're going to be letting out to produce more power, there's the potential for flooding. And that's just when they're doing a controlled release in order to generate more power. You can imagine if there was a catastrophic earthquake and that dam catastrophically failed, the kind of impact that would happen downstream. Now, this is where it starts to get complicated. There are a couple of oil and gas companies who have said, yeah, okay, so fracking causes earthquakes, and this is a super vulnerable area, but we'd still really like to frack there. So how about you let us do that? It's the truth. Despite this exclusion zone, there are two companies that want to begin fracking in the immediate area of not only the dam, but if you take a look at the areas that they want to be fracking in, they literally want to be fracking underneath the reservoir itself. Now, there's no question that there's oil and gas down there to be had. The question is this an appropriate time and way to access that while we have a dam that the AER has determined would be vulnerable to earthquakes from fracking, which is why they have that exclusion zone going on. It's triggered a lawsuit that's been going on since 2020, where TransAlta has said, hey, if you guys are seriously going to be considering doing some fracking here, whoever's doing it should have to pay for all of the infrastructure upgrades to the dam to make sure that the dam could withstand an earthquake that's potentially 4 on the Richter scale or higher. And again, it's really impossible to overstate how catastrophic a failure of this dam would be for everybody downstream of it. But where it gets really uncomfortable is allegedly there hasn't been any consultation done with anybody downstream from the dam. This includes, from what we're able to gather from looking at the AR's website, the Ochese First Nation. And there is a duty to consult that exists anytime there's going to be changes, potentially, to land that is part of treaty agreements. And of course, all of Alberta is covered by treaty agreements. So when you're talking about flooding an entire chunk of land like that, it's probably a good idea to put people into the loop. But there's a proceeding in progress right now with a hearing scheduled for, I believe it's March 18th to the 24th, where the Ochese Nation is saying, hey, so if this happens and if earthquakes happen there, which AER you've said is a risk, the whole reason for the exclusion zone again, that could not only mess with like our land, but it could mess with all of the land that we've agreed through treaties that we have access rights to hunt and trap on. Never mind all of the other downstream communities like Edmonton. If you live in the city of Edmonton, check your mailbox. Did you get a notice from Ridgeback Resources, now Saturn Energy, saying, hey, we're thinking about maybe doing some fracking near this dam. It could get interesting. You're okay with that though, right? It's also worth noting these are two smaller, the companies that are trying to push for this are two smaller resource companies. They're not big players. So there's a lot of questions as to why is this even a thing? But the greater questions is, why aren't we having this conversation on a provincial level? We saw through the energy crisis that this province has been experiencing for the last 48 hours, projected to go on for another couple of days, that the Brazeau Damn was being asked to increase production in order to help preserve the grid. If this thing goes, it's going to have an impact on the grid. There's no question about that. Not only from its own failure, but from all of the flooding. But do you hear politicians weighing in on this issue? Do you hear people talking about the fact that this is something that is in the end stages of the hearing process and the challenge? Because the first time we heard about this was when someone sent us a DM and said, hey, are you familiar with this thing at all? And then we started poking around. One of the biggest reasons that you probably aren't hearing from any politicians on this is because it represents something of an existential question for Albertans. Because on one hand, the AER has said fracking causes earthquakes. Earthquakes can destroy critical infrastructure. That's why we have this exclusion zone. But on the other hand, now is not a great time for the provincial government or any provincial politicians, or probably any politicians at any level in this province, probably even the school board. Lord knows David Parker would get upset about that. But if any politicians acknowledged that, yes, you know what, fracking does come with this set of risks. It can cause earthquakes. Maybe we should have a conversation about how we balance that and where we balance that. You can't speak ill of oil and gas in this province. And it's worth noting, nobody's speaking ill of oil and gas in this province. Simply asking the question, are there areas where the risks of fracking are worth it? And are there areas where it isn't worth it? And when you talk about affecting the water supply for everything downstream from the Brazeau Dam, especially as we're heading into what many people are predicting is going to be a drought in the province of Alberta for the next year, one would think that preserving the integrity of the water supply would take a little piece of the conversation. But nobody's talking about it. So talk about it. That's all we're saying. Moving on from there. We got one segment left. And then we're going to open it up to our open mic. And if anybody wants to weigh in with any thoughts, they absolutely can. We're going to move to our regular segment, semi-regular segment. Are you FOIPing kidding me? Because we got another FOIP result back. And this is the result. It's not the last one, to be clear. But this is the result of a series of FOIPs that we've done because we've been trying to make sense of how exactly did Alberta find itself in this conversation where we're entertaining the possibility of an Alberta pension plan. So to recap a little bit, in 2019, after winning the provincial election, Jason Kenney and the UCP launched the incredibly biased foregone conclusion fair deal panel in the true faith of all of the panels that the UCP launched under the Kenney regime, where you had a foregone conclusion and you wanted to demonstrate that at all costs. So you'd have a panel that would go and do the things, cough, supervised consumption sites, cough. And they launched this fair deal panel, but because despite Alberta historically having the highest quality of living and the highest incomes in the entire country, we're somehow the perpetual victims in everything. And I'm allowed to say that, for the record, because I was born and raised in this province. And I personally think it's ridiculous how often Albertans lean into the trope of, oh, but we're the victims. Because that's not the Alberta that I grew up with. And I know there's probably a lot of people who are going to look and say, he's that Durst-looking guy from Calgary. He lives in a big city. And you can say that if you want. I mean, keep rolling. Do as you will. But I actually grew up in northern Alberta. I grew up in rural Alberta before I moved to Calgary when I was like 12 or 13. So I have the privilege of having both rural and urban in this Fred Dursty shell. And I don't agree with the perpetual victimhood that we put on, because the Albertans that I know, the Albertans that I grew up with, are Albertans who get stuff done. They're not Albertans who just go, oh, life's so unfair. That's not what the Alberta that I grew up with is all about. But nonetheless, we had to have our fair deal panel because we're just not being treated fairly, even though we make more money than everybody else in the country. One of the recommendations that came out of that panel was to create an Alberta pension plan. So in 2020, an RFP, or request for proposal, was put out on the report to say, hey, who wants to do this report to see how much money we would get? How much would it cost? What are the pros? What are the cons? Tell us all of the things. And that RFP was won by Morneau Chappelle. Now, this is where you have to kind of strap in and bear with us for a bit, because we get into the nitty-gritty a little. That report was scheduled to be delivered in just a few months, but it was somehow delayed until Smith became premier. And then in late 2022, in December of 22, when she was asked about it, she announced that it was actually going to be updated with the new information because she wanted it updated. Now, this is because the actual actuarial data that was used in the original reports was from 2019. The government, the federal government, produces the actual actuarial reports every 3 years. So in 2019, 2022, and the next will be 2025 ad infinitum. Now, Smith and the UCP have provided a lot of varying reasons why the report was delayed until the final version was released in August of this year. Sometimes it was that the report was delayed, sometimes it was the report that needed to be updated, and sometimes, in just true Danielle Smith fashion, she dodges the question entirely and then says something mean about Stephen Guilbeault. So we've been chasing down FOIPs over the last couple of months to try to figure out what was going on. And the first significant result that we got, we talked about a few episodes ago, and that had to do with a PowerPoint presentation that we were provided. That was the first PowerPoint presentation from the meeting that Morneau Chappelle had with the Alberta government when they were talking about, okay, so let's just be on the same page. What's this report supposed to do? How's the report supposed to do it? And most of it was a pretty banal PowerPoint, but there was this slide at the end that was particularly important, because this slide demonstrated the timeline, demonstrated the key deliverables and the touch points. So the report outline was going to be provided. Here's what we're working on. December 1st of 2020. And there's a bunch of meetings. Draft report was going to be due February 1st, 2020. So just 2 months after that. The meeting reviewed the draft report first week in February, and then the final report was due April 1st, 2020, with a meeting to review the final report on the first week of April. So, to be clear, the original report for the RFP that's available was provided to the UCP, and it was supposed to take a grand total of 5 months. That's how long the report was supposed to take to be produced. From start to finish, from scratch, they're going to put the whole report together. It's going to take 5 months. And it seemed like when Jason Kenney was talking about the report, when he was being asked about it in press conferences, he was very clear in the run-up till April. Hey, you know what? It's scheduled to be coming on time. Everything should be good. We should be getting the report. April, looking good. But some of you might remember, in April of 2021, Mr. Kenney had some problems. Had a little bit of a leadership failure. Barely passed a leadership review, and then there's this whole, I'm going to step down, and then there's a leadership race. And so it's understandable with the leadership race going on that it might have been delayed a little bit. But here's where we get to the what's really going on part of the show. Because Smith has repeatedly said, when she's been asked since the election, how come you said you weren't going to campaign on a pension plan? How come you're releasing the report? And Danielle Smith has said, I believe it's critically important Albertans get that information. They need to know all of the details of the report. They need to know. Albertans just deserve to know the truth. They deserve to know it. I didn't want to keep Albertans waiting. As soon as we got the report in August of 2023, I felt like Albertans should have access to that because I believe in transparency or something to that effect. So we were curious, was there actually a delay in this report? Because it seems really weird that the report, Jason Kenney's saying in April, yeah, I'm going to be looking at the report in just like a couple days here. And then all of a sudden we don't hear anything about any reports until when the next report was released. And it turns out, yeah, Morneau-Chappelle finished their contract. They delivered a final report. And they delivered that final report on schedule. Because that's the FOIP that we got back at the beginning of this week. Morneau-Chappelle delivered their pension report as was required in the RFP. And they delivered it on April 6th, 2021. So the provincial government, the UCP government, had the report from Morneau-Chappelle in their hands on April 6th, 2021. And then for some reason, it was just never ever released. And at some point in time, the decision was made, hey, you know what? We've waited so long to release this report that Albertans deserve to know about because of transparency and stuff, and they're getting screwed so bad. We got to move on this. We got to let Albertans make an informed choice and stuff. They decided to go back, redo the report with the updated numbers that were provided at the end of 2022. But even then, it gets really confusing. Because if we take a look at the Morneau-Chappelle report from start to finish, it took 5 months. And that was from start to finish. That was starting with nothing, writing the whole report, doing all of the calculations, doing all of that stuff, and then producing the report and handing it off on April 6th, 2021 to the UCP government. Their contract was fulfilled at that time. One can't help but wonder if the UCP, at the end of 2022, knowing that the data was going to be released at the end of 2022, said in a press conference, which they did, that they were going to be delaying the report because they wanted to have it updated with the new information, why an updated report would take 8 months. Because we're now talking from January to August. Especially when, as has been pointed out by people way smarter than us, the reports are, for all intents and purposes, pretty much identical. Dr. Dwayne Bratt, who's a political scientist at the University of Mount Royal, and who's been on the show, been generous enough to appear on the show multiple times, took a look at the report right after we got it. Because as soon as we received it, we said, hey, we're not journalists, because we're not. Any economists, any political scientists, anybody who knows the things, send us an email. We'll send you the report. You can tell us what you think. Everybody wins. Dr. Dwayne Bratt took a look at it. He said, I've reviewed the differences between the LifeWorks August 2023 and Morneau-Chappelle 2021 reports on the Alberta pension plan. It says nice things about us. Outside the name of the company and the date, the two reports are largely the same. He goes on to say, here are two important passages from the executive summary, 2023 report on the left and 2021 report on the right. They're identical. So it's not like they built a whole report from scratch, and that's why it took them 8 months. So there's some really big questions that exist. But there's one other thing that we want to talk about that exists in both of those reports as well, because it's really, really important. And it's one of the points that hasn't been talked about very effectively through the whole conversation on the Alberta pension plan. And that's where the report talks about what's required to set up an Alberta pension plan. It's very clear. You see this, Daniel Smith says this all the time, and all of the pro pension plan folks say this all the time. Well, you know what? It's to leave the Canada pension plan, it's got to be, you have to have the same amount of benefits and you have to pay the same or less. You can't have less benefits. You can't pay more. That's not right. You can't do that when you set up this plan. And that's true when you set up the plan. But it's important to realize there's no guarantees about what happens after the plan is set up. In fact, from both reports, we'll read from the LifeWorks report here because it's the most current version. Alberta could amend or change an APP once it has been established. From another paragraph, it is important to note, however, that if an APP is established, the government of Alberta may set a legislated rate for an APP that is different from that of the CPP and also different from the minimum contribution requirement. For example, it may set a rate higher than the minimum contribution requirement to provide contribution stability. If the legislated rate is set higher than the minimum contribution requirement, then the savings estimated above will be less. So what both reports make a point of saying is, yeah, it's true, it's got to be equal when you leave, but once you've left, the government can do whatever they want. Which doesn't exactly scream stability and security when you have a government that has so far not been particularly transparent about their motivations for the report. It's easy to look at, they needed the numbers. The numbers they wanted to make sure they were giving Albertans the current numbers. Well, if they'd released the report before 2022, they would have done exactly that. They chose not to. And then when the new report, the LifeWorks report, came out and was being developed, they chose to not release that until August. Again, inexplicably, somehow that report, even though it was literally, let's just punch in the new numbers and off we go, because most of the body of the report is the same, that report somehow took 8 months. One could, if they wanted to, speculate that the whole reason why the original report that was done, signed, sealed, and delivered in 2021 wasn't released is because the UCP realized that with their flagging popularity because of COVID and the many other things, if they tried to have a conversation about a pension plan going into an election, they would get their asses handed to them. So instead of releasing the report, and by the way, the difference, there's been a couple of economists, including Dr. Trevor Tombe, who's taken a look at this thing, and they've said, yeah, the numbers aren't that different. The net result is not that different. Now, there also have been a number of economists who've said, but their premise is still incredibly flawed and we'd never walk away with that much money. But for the reports themselves, the numbers in regards to what Albertans would get, only a couple of tens of billions of dollars. And when we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars, that's not that much. So it can't be, well, there was going to be so much more money if we waited. That doesn't make any sense. But it does make sense that they would, as an agenda item that they knew that they wanted to pursue, because this is a pivotal piece in the Free Alberta strategy that was introduced by Rob Anderson, who is now Danielle Smith's executive office director, shitposter on Twitter. This was a key part of his strategy. It's also worth noting that in 2020, when the Buffalo Project, and again, they're called Bison. This would be a pet peeve of mine forever. But when the Buffalo Project was launched in 2020, not only was Rob Anderson a signatory, but so was the current communications director for Danielle Smith. So they wanted, in the Buffalo Project initiative, they wanted a pension as well. But they knew there was no way they would win the 2023 election if they were honest and if they were sincere about what their intentions were, about what their goals were, and about how they had played with this report and manipulated the release of not just one, but 2 reports. There's no way they would have won the election. So instead, of letting Albertans have access to the information that Danielle Smith believes that Albertans should have access to. Instead of doing that, they kicked the ball down the field, and as soon as the election was over, they released the LifeWorks version of the report, pretended that the Morneau-Chappelle version of the report was never a thing, and have since spent upwards of $10 million trying to sell Albertans on the idea of an Alberta pension plan, which, for the record, could have bought 3 brand new MRI suites. Now, we've got a couple other FOIPs coming down the pipes that we're very excited about. One of them is just fun. It's just going to be some fun. I don't know if we're going to get the information or not, because that's how much fun it is, but we feel good about it. So we've got that coming. We've got a couple other technical FOIPs coming as well. And I'm going to do the mid-show plug while I get ready to open up the open mic to everybody. But, one of the reasons why we're able to produce the kind of content that we do and why we're able to do the FOIPs that we do is because of the support that we get through our Patreon page. So, shameless plug time before we do the open mic. If you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to produce here, if you like the kind of FOIPs that we're trying to produce here, then you can sign up to be one of our Patreon sponsors at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab, where for just the price of a fancy cup of coffee or a muffin or 500 gummy bears, I think they're still a penny. I don't know. It's been a while since I bought gummy bears. I could use a gummy bear right now. Anyways. 500 of those bad boys. You can help us to continue to do what we do here. So all of that can be done at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab. We'll plug that again at the end of the show when we also plug our merchandise line. But in the meantime, in between time, we're going to open it up to our open mic as we do. Now, for those of you who are wanting to say something, all you have to do is join us on the Twitter Spaces or the X Spaces. Any mobile device will work. You can't do it from an iPad or a computer, we've learned. So if you want to, then you need to be on a mobile device. But otherwise, if you want to just throw a comment in the chat, we have one of the most amazing chat groups that are just absolutely delightful. You should join in on the chat because people are fantastic in there. I'm scrolling through it as we go right now. But we're going to open it up to the open mic. And I believe the first person who is in the queue was a longtime friend of the show and speaker Cassandra. So we're going to add Cassandra in. And it looks like we have a couple other people who've tagged in as well. Cassandra, what's going on tonight?
Oh, where do I start? I always get like you bring up a couple good topics. I have so much to say, and then I'm like, which one do I start with?
We try to produce engaging content here.
I guess where I want to. I looked up some statistics recently on median incomes and some other things. So according with the. I want to talk about how it's impossible for Albertans to overpay into the Canada Pension Plan because your contribution level is capped at 60,000. So, which means that if you make 61,000 or you make 100,000, you are still paying the same contribution as you did at 60,000. Prior to 60,000, it goes up incrementally. It's based on a percentage of your income. But once you get past the 60,000, you no longer pay more. You stay at the 60,000 contribution level. The average median income in Canada is 63,000 annually, and that's the averaged out across Canada. And the average median income for Alberta is 77,000. And so both the average people making the average median income in Canada and the people making an average median income for Alberta are still paying exactly the same contribution level, and it's absolutely impossible. And I don't know, like the absolute idiot. Like I've been struggling with this. Is it that she's that stupid? Or does she think we're that stupid? And I finally come somewhere in the middle where Yes, she thinks we're that stupid, but she's also that stupid that she thinks
I don't think
that we're
she's.
that stupid.
Well, I mean, there's that. I think she thinks that people are that stupid. I think that she thinks that the victimhood complex that exists in this province runs so deep that all you have to say is, the Western or Eastern elite, and everybody will go, yeah. And it's. She's tried to explain the theoretical construct that she's using to say that Alberta overpays, but it's
Well, and it's not Alberta that overpay. It's not Alberta that pays. Like, it's not our tax dollars that are pay for our CPP.
right.
To be clear, it's not government money. And she's pretty much said, and I don't have the clip that I can just throw in the chat, um, but she's pretty much said that like, she wants to grab this money and use it for the government coffers and do what they want with it. And the thing is it's not the Alberta government's money. It's not tax dollars. It's money we pay off our paychecks. A portion we pay our contributions. Our employers match them, and that's the end of it. It has nothing. And by the way, I had, not when I was working, not only did I pay into the CPP and my employer matched my CPP, but most of my employers also paid for a separate pension plan, which I paid a portion of, and they matched that portion. So it's no different. Like, it's the same thing. It just happens that the CPP in most cases is managed better and more profitable than some of these other pension plans that I was also paying into with my employer. But they're contributions. They're not taxes. They're contributions. They're like I I
overpaid in
know
my
the
savings
like,
account
it's
this
just,
week.
I know I'll just stutter for the rest of this conversation if I just trying to wrap my head around, like, I don't know, the mental gymnastics involved in trying to make this sound the way they want it to sound is just
I mean,
unbelievable.
the basic premise that they're running with is they're saying that an Albertan, a generic Albertan, will pay money into this savings plan or this pension plan, and they won't get that money back this year. But that's like me saying, I overpaid in my
Well, you're not going
RRSP.
to get it back this year in the Alberta pension plan either. Like, come on. Like, it's you're paid. I'm not getting it back from my RSP until I retire.
That's what I'm saying.
And then when I withdraw it, they're going to tax me on it, which is the same with the CPP, and it will also be the same with the APP. So, again, it's mental gymnastics to try to make it sound like it's something other than, like, that's what happens. That's how pensions work. Like, it doesn't matter if it's the CPP, the pension you went in on with that your employer provides. It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter if it's your RSP or whatever registered retirement plan you have. Like, it doesn't matter. You don't get it now, and when you do withdraw it, you're taxed on it. And yeah, like, you can just jump around and try to make all kinds of nonsense out of it you want, but it just doesn't make it true.
It's true. Anything else you
And I
wanted to
think
add?
most Canadians understand that.
I think you're right. And I think that the longer that this conversation goes on between Alberta and Canada and Albertans, especially, like, I had the conversation with a few folks this week where they were like, well, we're going to get the same benefits. It's like, well, to start with, but there's nothing, Garrett, literally nothing that prevents
And
any
let's be
government of the
clear,
day.
Nate, they're telling us, like this is Danielle Smith and the UCP telling us that we're going to get the same amount. Like,
Let's go back to the Tylenol for a second.
well, you know what I mean? Like, come on, we have to consider the source here that's telling us that, we'll get the same. No, I don't believe that.
Yeah.
I don't believe it any more than I believe anything else that comes out of their mouth, especially. And even if I did give them the benefit of the doubt at some point in time, that's gone because of just how many lies and utter BS they throw. Anyway, but I regress. And the other thing I wanted to talk about, like, as you know, I worked with an NGO on the downtown east side of Vancouver. We worked with a lot of our not all of them, but a lot of our clientele were addicts. And I just want to say, like, everything that you described, like when you were talking about that British Medical Association reported about BC and the safe supply, like, and you were said it, it's almost like it works the same as with the clean injection sites. It actually does. Like, I've actually witnessed it, and I was one of the people, like, 2 decades ago that was advocating. We were advocating 2 decades ago for safe supply because, I mean, we didn't even have a toxic drug supply at the time. We were just looking, I mean, we did, but not to the level that we have now.
Yeah.
I mean, we were mostly dealing with the spread of HIV and AIDS, which was just horrific at the time. But one of the reasons, over and above, the reasons that it's become more urgent now, that we were looking at it was that, first of all, we were looking at Portugal and some other jurisdictions that had done it and how they had done it, because they were treating it, instead of treating it as a criminal issue, they were treating it as a health issue. And they, and all the data about people, when you're doing this, people being able to access resources, it's 100% true, because I'll give you an example. One of our offices, it was the PACE Health Network, and we had an office right in Pigeon Square on East Hastings, and it was specifically for our clientele that were in active addiction, and we knew from dealing with them, like, if you get somebody coming in and they are hurting, like they're drug sick, and you're trying to talk to them, they're like bouncing off the walls, they can't focus, they can't do anything. But if they can get just enough, like, not to get high so they're on the nod, but just enough that it just takes the sickness away, and they're just perfectly normal, and you can now work with them and you can work with a job plan with them. You can work on a plan to get them housed. You can work on all the things that they need because they're just normal. And you wouldn't even know in those situations when they're just getting that just enough. You wouldn't look at them and go, "Oh, that person's an addict," because they wouldn't have any of if they were dressed well. They wouldn't have any of the classic, like the junkie dance or the itching or all the other things that happen. You wouldn't see that because they're not getting enough to get high. It's just enough to keep the sickness away and keep them level. And that's why we were looking at it, was because it was easier to work with them and get them and in a way that they could focus, and we could make a plan with them to get them off the street and get them resources, and even get them into rehab was easier, because one of the horrible things, like, we can talk about having enough beds, and that's part of the issue for sure, but it's not the whole issue. But, like, we get people that would come in and they were like, "Okay, I'm ready now, can you get me into the detox?" Because you have to go into detox before they will accept you into the rehabilitation program. You have to go through detox. So we're like, okay. So then you're like, you call the detox, and the detox, like, "We don't have any beds, tell them to call back tomorrow morning." And in the meantime, like, that loss of clarity, they're still trying to keep the sickness away. They get high. And then what happens, they might make it that first morning to make that phone call, and then there's not a bed. They might make it the second, but by the time it's getting to, like, the third time, they're spiraling back into their situation of survival, and it takes an amount of time before they can gain that clarity again, where they're like, "Okay, I'm ready to do this again." And then they go through the same cycle all over again. And then even if you do manage to get them a bed right away and get them into a detox bed, once they're through the detox, then you got to get them into rehab, because rehab's really where the real healing starts. All detox does is it's a supervised way to, and with some medical intervention or not, where they can monitor that person as they get the drugs out of their system, and then they can put them into the. But half the time there wasn't a rehab bed available for them once they got out of detox. So again, you're in the same situation. And this is the kind of spiral. So that's another reason, like when we're looking at safe supply, it's a way to give them just enough to keep them from getting sick, that they can function normally, and you can help them, and that's over and above just not having them accessing drugs that may or may not kill them because of whatever's in them. It's also about just, making it easier to hold them together, to help them access resources while they're waiting to get into that rehab center, or
100%. I mean,
whatever.
I look back at the conversations that we've had with people like Guy Felicella. And if you haven't listened to the
I
episode
did.
that we had, I would,
Yeah.
anybody in our audience, I would strongly encourage you to listen to that one, because Guy talks about the fact that I mean, there's a lot of people who are self-medicating undiagnosed stuffs. A lot of the people who are using stimulants are self-medicating things like ADHD, and
Gabriel Mate, I had that conversation. Uh, oh God, I would have been 33 at the time, and so that's like 24, 25, almost 25 years ago. I got diagnosed with ADHD, and I read the book by Gabriel Mate on ADHD, and I found out, I looked in the bio, and it was like he's in Vancouver, and I looked in the white pages, and I called him, and I left a message, and he called me back. And we had that conversation about, because I was talking, because I am a former addict, and I talked, not heroin or anything, but similar cycles. And I talked about how getting that diagnosis and getting treatment had actually alleviated a lot of any fight I had with wanting to dabble in something. It went away because I was being treated properly. I was finally being treated for something, and it alleviated that hugely. And we had a huge conversation, and subsequently, Gaber actually said at the time, he's like, yeah, he goes, I've actually noticed that too. Like when I'm dealing with people with ADHD, and I've made that connection as well. And we had an extensive conversation about it. And he actually subsequently went on to do more research into it, and write a few books on it. And so, yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Thank you, Cassandra.
Sorry.
No worries. I got 3 other people in the queue, so I'm going to give you anything else you want to wrap up with, or?
I do. There's one thing, because I have to do it, and I just can't control myself. But I just can't do. Jason, and I'll tell you, it's very similar to, he's just saying the same things that I had screamed at me from this psychopath that answers his phones. But he keeps saying there's available shelter beds, and he's talking about Edmonton, and in the Bissell Center last night. I don't know if you saw it, but people took video of the hundreds of people lined up outside the Bissell Center, dying to get in. It was in the bitter cold in Edmonton, and the staff were talking about how heartbreaking it was, because they needed one person to leave to let one person in, and they had to rush to close the doors, and it was just heart-wrenching for them. And in the meantime, he still keeps doubling down, even though we've got evidence, and people are starting to document it. Frontline service workers are talking about it, and he's just outright lying about it, and it's just not true. I tried to get a shelter bed. I was outright told by several different service providers here in Calgary, and I just have to put that out there before I let you go. And one more thing, I saw Thomas Lukasik in here somewhere when I signed into Twitter, and I just want to say, I just think he is the most lovely man in the world. I've become a huge fan of him and Charles Adler, and all the lovely work they do. And I just wanted to say that if he's still listening.
I'm sure he'll hear it at some point. Yeah. I mean, one of the things I'm gonna add on to that, and then I'm gonna bring in Always Vote, because they're next in the queue here. But one of the things that I think that Mr. Nixon's being slightly disingenuous about is when he's talking about the availability of shelter beds, he's ignoring there's a lot of barriers that exist. So if somebody has an animal, or if somebody has a partner, or if somebody does not want to have a particular religion jammed down their throat, then all of a sudden a lot of those beds become inaccessible to them. That's just the reality. And I think he's also being a little disingenuous, not acknowledging that they're not geographically necessarily in the most accessible of places. So I think you're right. He's
No, I drove a few Christmases ago. It was right before COVID. It was Christmas Day. I saw this guy and I almost drove and I turned around. I'm like, I can't leave him there. It was like minus 40 that afternoon with the wind chill. And I was like, okay. And I tried to drive him, by the way, I tried to suggest, first of all, the Calgary drop-in center. And he was like, hell no. It's not, it's dangerous. It's too dangerous in there. And I'm like, okay. Because it's minus 40. And then and then I said the mustard seed, and he was very reluctant. The mustard seed, the one run by the Nixon family, he was very reluctant to go to that one because he didn't feel that was overly safe either. And so, when you're looking at that, you really have to ask yourself, what is Jason Nixon's real motivation? And that's all I got.
There you go. All right. I'm going to bring in, looks like always vote tapped out. So I'm going to bring in Chris, and then I'm going to bring in Tammy. And I think that's going to wrap us up for the evening. But Chris, what's going on, sir? I think you got to unmute your thinger there.
Sorry. I don't know how to work things apparently.
That, technology's hard, man. I don't know if you've watched the show for any length of time, but like the technical errors that we produce on a weekly basis are pretty impressive.
I forget who said it, but the quote is like, if technology gets to a point where it's indistinguishable from magic. Well, for me, I'm really bad at magic, so technology makes sense. I'm just terrible at it. So no, I had a couple really quick points. I'll try and keep it really short. Johnny Wakefield from the Edmonton Journal, he did an interview with Nathan Neudorf on today about the energy situation, and questioning the minister defended being on an energy only market as opposed to capacity. And there's a couple quick points I want to draw from the article because I thought it's really interesting. The first was where the minister, he describes the energy only market. Literally the quote he says something like, it's an energy only market because it's energy, only. It reminded me of this movie where Nicolas Cage, in this movie where he's like he plays like a killer or whatever. He goes and he's holding a sawzall and he says it's called a sawzall because it saws all. That was the first thing I thought of when I'm thinking Nathan Neudorf saying it's energy only. No duh.
Oh man.
But anyway, so the other two things from that story I thought were interesting was that the NDP declined to comment.
Interesting.
Right. And I'm like, there's a couple reasons you could think of that. Like you said earlier in the show, talking about oil and gas, especially right now when people are, arguing about it, maybe that could be the situation. It could also be that they're focusing more towards the homelessness crisis that we're dealing with. So, either way, I shouldn't speculate. I'm just saying, I thought that was really interesting because you would think of all the times where, the NDP has said these are the consequences if you don't do what we're saying. And this is like, a prophecy fulfilled. And yet it's like, you don't want to comment on it. I thought it was really interesting. The third thing I want to mention was that we also got confirmation from Johnny Wakefield in this article that the premier is on vacation.
See, we knew it. We've been saying it for a while.
And it just was really funny to me because Jason Nixon, here he is on a Friday bad-mouthing the mayor of Edmonton, the capital city of your province, about trying to politicize the homelessness crisis. And that's actually ironic what he was accusing the mayor of, saying, oh, he's trying to make this political. And then you get this moment where, oh, hey, your boss is also on vacation, but you're not. It's hypocrisy.
I mean, yeah. I think there's like a rule. If you're a UCP premier and there's a crisis in the province, vacation. And I mean, I know that the vacations are scheduled and everything, but here's my beef with it. My frustration with it. I mean, I don't begrudge politicians taking vacations. I know there's a lot of people who are like, whatever, but like everybody needs a little time away from whatever it is they do. So I believe everybody should get vacations. That includes politicians, even if I don't like them. But Danielle Smith used to live stream from her hotel room in Arizona when she was vaccine shopping across the border. So it's a little mind-blowing to me that the premier of Alberta can't surface up from the beach in Panama or wherever to do like, hey, Alberta, I know I'm away, but I'm following this very, very closely, and I've got top man working on this thing. We're going to get through this. Stay, frosty, or whatever. But nothing. It's all the manufacturer tweets compliment of her former campaign manager, which I think is.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just going to say that the premier was able, her and her environment minister were able to communicate all the way from Dubai.
Right.
So I mean, it's not like it's impossible. And what I also want to mention, which I think is really funny, is that I don't know if you've seen on Twitter, people are making a lot of references to Enron. The whole it's they're doing it on purpose, which let's be honest, probably not the case. But there's another Texas comparison people are forgetting, which is Ted Cruz skipping town, going to a vacation to Cancun.
Yeah.
And again, I agree. Vacation, I wouldn't have ever mentioned it, but for Jason Nixon to go after the mayor on something that literally is, I don't know, it really bothers me. But my other last comment I was going to make was, I think this Albertan victimhood scheme is really predicated on a second hinge, which is this Alberta exceptionalism, which used to be true. We used to say, hey, we're the province that, we have all these amazing resources. We're the province that, we were able to pull oil out of, sand, this impossible thing. We've conquered the frontier. We've done all these amazing things as Albertans. That was really what, buoyed, the original Lougheed, National Energy Program thing was, hey, we're not better, but rather that there's something special about us, and we're special, and people are trying to attack us because they're special. That's almost kind of the second hinge as to why it works so well with some people, this Alberta victimhood. But it's misplaced because now we're at a point where in the capital city of the province, where politicians go every day, 4 or 5 days out of the week during a session, homelessness is all around them. They see it. You can go onto the Capital Line train in Edmonton, like I do almost every day, and you can see tents strewn about everywhere. The fact that it's only gone worse in the past 5 years, and the victimhood is about energy and about the feds and not about actual Albertans who are suffering. It just boggles my mind, and that's my last point I want to make is we got to follow journalists. We got to keep paying attention to them because they're the ones getting us this information we need, especially Brandy Morin. Follow her.
Yes.
Like that is, if you don't have her on your follows, you should put her on alerts right now because she's the one out there covering. But you know what? I saw she was talking to a kid, this 26-year-old guy, only 4 years younger than me. And this poor guy, he's in a tent and the cops are slashing tents. Yeah. They're slashing up these people's homes to make them unusable. But we can't get them into a warm place. Like, what sick, twisted... I want to start swearing. I can't... That's why I'm saying follow the reporting, because we need to see this. We need to see the crimes against humanity happening to people in our towns, in our cities, and we need to be aware of it so we can start making noise about this. And that's kind of why I want to leave it here is, I'm frustrated. I think we're all frustrated, but we need to be paying attention.
100%, man. 100%. And, I thought one of the most telling, I don't live in Edmonton because There's so many jokes I could make right there. I'm
Trust
not.
me.
I'm
My
gonna let it
girlfriend
go
was
though
like,
tonight. But I don't live in Edmonton. But I saw there was a post on the Twitter machine that talked about, hey, so this was the encampment site that was removed 3 days ago, and it's all back. And that to me is that's because we're not dealing with the problem. At best, we're mitigating the symptoms for a short period of time. I want to say before I let you go and I move on, looks like Always Vote is back. But I want to say before, I laughed for like half an hour, man, when you threw out the "Hey, you sure about that?" tweet to Danny. For a little bit of context for anybody who's listening, Daniel Smith put out a "Giving Harmful Drugs to Youth Funded by Taxpayers Will Never See the Light of Day in Alberta," and Chris put out the perfect tweet where he just said, "Hey, you sure about that?" and a screen capture of the Globe and Mail article that we referenced earlier. Alberta drugs bought from Turkey posed serious risks to newborns. So that was just like,
like when I posted that, I woke up first thing in the morning. When I woke up, I saw her post that, and I'm just thinking, it's not like as if any of the information we're seeing is in a bubble. The Daniel Smith is seeing the same things too. She's seeing the studies coming out. She's seeing this information. She's purposefully ignoring it. She's purposefully ignoring a story about the magic medication she bought, risking our children's lives. It gets to a point where I'm like, how can she go and make these ideological nonsensical posts and not expect people to call her out, and that's frankly, I think if the only way things will change is if people start getting a bit, and I don't want to say more aggressive because aggressive is wrong, but definitely more
louder.
vocal, louder,
Yeah,
get more vocal, be like, what the hell, like
100%.
that. I don't know. It gets to a point where something has to break, and unfortunately, it seems like it's our most vulnerable who are going to be the ones that suffer first, and it's just inhumane.
I mean, the way I'm going to do one little bit, and then I'll bring in Always Vote. But the way that I would sort of approach it is I always go back to when I think about things that moved the Kenny government. And if you want to talk about an entrenched government, like when they were entrenched in their policies, they were entrenched in their policies. But the only thing that made them blink, the only thing that made them change their mind about anything was when there were they went after teachers at the very beginning and they went after the curriculum. And there was those massive, massive protests across the province that filled up the city hall area and had huge, huge, huge marches and everything. And they blinked. And those are the things that make politicians blink. You have to be loud. You have to get people engaged. You have to get people showing up to say, not on my watch, you don't. So I agree with you 100%, man.
Thanks, man, and thanks for having me on. I hope you have a good night.
Yeah, thanks, man. You too. I'm going to bring in Always Vote, and we'll see what they have to say. They kind of tapped out, and then they kind of tap back in, and then we'll bring in Tammy for the end of the night, and that'll be the plan. It's Always Vote is in the process of connecting, so I'll just vamp for a second. Always Vote may not have the greatest internet connection. Sometimes that happens. So, hey, why don't I do a little plug here for the merch design, mix it in, and then if Always Vote can't make it, then we'll bring Tammy in. We have merch. You can go to abpoly.ca, who handle all of our merch stuffs. You can get the hoodies. You can get the coffee mugs. I love my coffee mug. I know that it's not the most expensive item on the store, so it's probably not the one I should be plugging, but I do love my coffee mug. You can get the coffee mug there. You can get, we have the t-shirts. There's a lot to unpack here. We have the keep the conversation going. And then we also have, with Alberta seeing one of the coldest winters, we're setting record temperatures. You probably want a toque. It'll probably get to you before the Turkish Tylenol, but you can get that at abpoly.ca as well. We're gonna be doing some more stickers and stuffs. So stay tuned for that. It looks like Always Vote does not have the connectivity to make it happen tonight. So we're going to bring in Tammy, and then we're going to wrap it up for the evening. Tammy, a regular speaker on the show. Tammy, what's going on tonight?
Hey, how's it going?
I'm having fun tonight. How are you?
So am I. I'm having fun listening to you tonight.
Well, that's good. I'm glad it's entertaining.
So a couple of things. So with the cold and the nasty, I have to remind myself that everything that I suffered in the last week is one of those first world issue kind of things. So our truck quit running because of the cold. So that had a knock-on effect of I had to miss a doctor's appointment. And our dog got sick, and we had to figure out how to get him to the doctor, to the vet. Luckily, he survived, so it's all good, but it was pretty hairy there for a while. But then I look at all the stuff going on with the cold and the folks suffering, and I like, it makes the little inconveniences I had, even though, the dog was at risk, it's still, we love him, but he's a dog. Right? It's not like it's a person.
Yeah.
And then I get on the Twitter machine, as you call them, the X, whatever. And I'm like, why can't people wake up? Like, we had that problem, the alert for the power. And of course, we shut everything down except one TV, all of our lights off, any computer that we could shut off. I have some servers running that I can't take down without taking down a bunch of stuff. So everything we could take down conceivably without taking the entire system down, I took down. We shut basically everything down for the night. And in the morning, I get up and I get on the Twitter machine, and here are some dum-dums, and that's my new term for them. If you ever watched the Flintstones,
Yep.
you remember the little alien fellow that would call Fred and Barney dum-dums? Yeah,
Yep.
well,
Yep.
that's
Yep.
my new old way of referring to Albertans who don't seem to care and don't really know anything. They're dum-dums. Because they are basically cavemen, let's face it. Going on again about the coal plants out by Wubman, where I worked. And them yelling about, well, we wouldn't have these problems if they hadn't shut down the plants. And I'm like, okay, well, number one, Sun 1, Sun 2, and Sun 3, yes, they are gone. They were also over 50 years old. They weren't efficient. None of those big plants are, but those were the eldest. They aren't going to run forever, guys. They've left Sun 4 and Sun 6 up. And I know all this because I worked out there. I ran the numbers on it for them, for TransAlta. They've been swapped to gas. And I will take on some of the blame for some of the misinformation, because as I was trying to explain things, and you know how bad Twitter is, that you can only put in so many characters.
Yep.
And when you're trying to build a tweet string, some things, unfortunately, post-stroke, get lost in the shuffle. So I referred to it as shut down, but what I really meant was that the coal part of it was shut down. Those two things are still up. They just only use gas.
Yep.
And then Sun 5 it's mothballed. It's not shut down permanently, but it's shut down. It is not making power, because it's basically there as a backup. They've left it there as a backup generator if something happens to 4 or 6. Now, that's the way it's set up now. But they're still screaming about how it's all the NDP's fault because the NDP pushed to get it shut down. Well, no, actually, you remember how I said I was there?
Yep.
They were already planning on shutting those things down already. Because, like I said, 1, 2, and 3 were like retirement. They're old. They're old as the hills. Like, they're all old. But those 3, they were really old. So those were getting shut down anyway. And what the NDP did was maybe they cut about 5 years off the plan of TransAlta's own plan to shut down those plants anyway, because it wasn't worth their while to run them anymore. I know, I ran the numbers. It was getting harder to do the shutdowns and the startups anymore because that took. So some of the numbers that I used to run were, how long does it take to shut it down? And more importantly, how long does it take to turn it back on? And when you turn it back on, how many times does it fail to restart? You know, kind of like when you run a computer for a long time and eventually it stops working and you replace so many parts, but really eventually there's just no fixing it anymore, just ain't gonna run anymore. Yeah, that kind of thing. But it's like Albertans can't get that it's a machine. Eventually, it's no longer feasible to start it back up. They're not making money trying to fix it anymore, like literally anymore. Plus, they have to look at part of the thing with the coal was they had to look at, okay, the coal in the Wabamun area, all the good coal is gone. All of it, gone. The coal that's left there is full of so much junk that when they burnt it, they would end up tossing so much toxic crap in the air that they got in trouble with the federal government. And as I like to say, before you start screaming about Trudeau and the feds and the environmentalists, those things, the regulations hadn't changed in years. Years.
Yep.
So it had nothing to do with Trudeau. If it was going to be about the Trudeau and the environmentalists, they would have made it harder for them. They hadn't.
Yep.
It was the same. But Albertans are so, I won't say the S word, they're such dum-dums.
That's
it's
fair.
like, that's,
I think people love a villain. I mean, if and that's one of the great weapons of political communications is that if you can attribute everything, if you can make it so that somebody's first reaction is oh, it's got to be that guy, then that's where people go right away. You know, like one of the reasons why I love people like Andrew Leach and Trevor Tombe is they are completely dispassionate about sides. You know, they get accused of being NDP shills, they get accused of being UCP shills, and it's mostly because they're just telling the truth in an accurate fashion most of the time. And you know, all of the experts are saying that this is a confluence. This weekend is a confluence of a number of different factors that Alberta simply wasn't prepared for, and in large part, it wasn't prepared for it because of the type of market that we have designed and chosen for our power generation. And it's a big complex conversation, which is, but I like your point about the machine stuff, because like, I don't see a whole lot of people running around rocking iPhone 3s. Obsolescence happens.
Yeah, obsolescence happens, and those things are over 50 years old. You know how I know? My dad worked at Sun 2 and son 3. Son 1 was already old, but my dad was there. My dad's long gone. I'm in my 50s. I'm the age now that my dad, in 2 years from my age, like I'm 52, when dad was 54, he died of cancer. So I'm like 2 years old from the... It's just like these plants are old. Keith Hills was one of the newest ones. Genesee is the newest one. I want to bang my head against the wall because it's like, I don't know if it's actually people that get it or if it's trolls.
I think there's a lot of trolls. And that's one thing about the Twitter, and also, I mean, my God, Facebook. But
yeah, I don't even bother with Facebook.
No, I don't really either. But that's one of the things that, you know, there's a lot of accounts that are out there that I strongly suspect, and there's good reason to believe, are just there to make noise and say the things. And I mean,
and stir. My dad and mom would call them shit disturbers
100%.
or shit stirrers.
Yep. But I'll be honest with you, those are the ones that I don't care about, because at the end of the day, the people that we want to reach here at the show are the people who are able to hear the things, who are able to have nuanced conversations, who are able to take in new information. Because if your mind is so set that no matter what happens, you're just, Trudeau, I don't, okay, well, you can, I don't know, go listen to the Counter Signal or something.
That's why those are the accounts that you've probably seen me do it a lot on
yes,
Twitter.
And thank you.
Troll, period. Just block.
Yep.
It's like, yeah, just block them. It's a troll.
Saves a lot of time. Anything else you want to say, Tammy? I got one other person who's tapped in, and then I'm going to shut it down for the night.
Okay. Well, the only thing I will say is I've been helping Dave Gray with his new thing, and I'm their IT person. So we just got a website set up for managing people who want to basically we'll say, you will use your language, since you know my issues having had a stroke. I don't talk well at the best of times. So that people want to tap in. So if you go to the citizens
research form, isn't it?
Yes, but slash, and it's citizens research. So it's CRF members .com, or no, just C. Let me bring it up on my website.
Yeah,
anyway.
I mean, like, tag us in a tweet, and we'll throw that out there.
Yes. Anyway, if you go there and you sign in, that's going to be our membership management platform. So once we get you in there, once you've created an account on that site, we'll add you to one of the teams that is handling some of the stuff. And we're trying to get things all set up and running pretty quickly. I know Dave was going to come out with some more videos and things right away soon.
Excellent.
But yeah, I'm having fun being the IT person.
Good to hear that thing's growing some legs. And yeah, share us the link, and we'll make sure that we send it out on all of our things.
Cool.
Awesome.
Anyway, have a good night.
Thanks, Tammy. You have a good night too.
Talk to you later.
All right, we got one other person that we're going to bring in. This is hopefully this works. It's I'm going to guess they're on the progressive side of the scale, given that their handle is Progressive Albertan. But Progressive Albertan, if you want to mute yourself and share your thoughts, you're going to be our last speaker of the night.
Hello.
Hello.
So I just want to say a couple things. Going to be short.
Okay.
No matter how much Danielle Smith screws up, like with this Tylenol medicine, and the Globe and Mail report about it, well, having risks in children. No matter how much he screws up, Albertans are still going to vote for her, especially in the rural areas. And no matter how much Edmonton screams at Danielle Smith by voting NDP, rural Alberta southern Calgary and, well, parts Lethbridge, they'll always stick to the UCP because the neighbors vote UCP, your friend voted UCP, and your family voted UCP. No matter how much she'll screw up, everybody will continue voting UCP. And even though the NDP, they made really great gains in Calgary, what went wrong in the election? That's probably the main question. And frankly, well, I'm not sure.
Well,
But
I'd bet all the money in my pockets that they would have won that election if they hadn't done the tax silliness. I
yeah,
think that
yeah,
absolutely cost them the election. But
it
I
did.
got to challenge you a bit, man, because if you take a look at the 2015 results, there were, I'm looking at the map right now, 1, 2, 3, 4 constituencies in South Calgary that went conservative, and there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that went NDP. So it I think that if there's and if you take a look at the results of the 2023 election, there were a lot of those constituencies were really quite close. So I think that
I agree. Yeah,
that if the NDP was to show up with a value proposition and not shoot themselves in the foot in the process, I think that we might be looking at a very different landscape post 2023. But as I've said many times on the show before, and certainly other people, political strategists, commentators on the show, and others have pointed out, the save a couple of thousand votes in Calgary would have gone to the NDP, and the NDP would be in government right now. And
yeah,
I don't think it's unreasonable to say that the misstep of publicly introducing a platform plank that had an increased corporate tax alienated enough Calgary voters that it swung the pendulum the other way. I think that if they just not said anything about it and not done that and worried about the bigger fish to fry, I think they probably would have formed government. So I think that it's not
yeah.
a measure of those South Calgary voters are super entrenched. I think it's more a measure of you got to get if you want to get somebody out of the trench, you have to give them a reason. Otherwise, they're just going to stay there because that's where they feel safe.
Yeah, if you look at 2022 polling data, you can see NDP is going to clearly form government if an election were held in 2022. But that was not the case because our election was in 2023. And I'm relatively new to Alberta politics because I wasn't interested until Danielle Smith took power, and I was like, "Oh crap! How the hell did she get in power when you have so many other options?" And I don't know why, South Calgary would vote for her over another option, because you can see that Danielle Smith, she came from the Wild Rose background, so she's not from a more center right, maybe center type perspective. She's more right, far right maybe perspective, if you know what I mean.
Oh, for sure. And certainly if you take a look at how COVID apparently radicalized her, the views that she espoused on her locals page and on her various different web series, I would argue, her positions that she's put on record are farther right than most of the far right views in the Wild Rose. I've never heard her say throw people into a lake of fire, so you got to give her that. But just short of that. Anything else that you wanted to add in there, man?
I'll one last thing. Why would South Calgary, vote for Danielle Smith when she's clearly attacked? You can see she's quote unquote attacking the cities. In Edmonton recently, the homeless centers are not getting the funding and resources they need to deal with situations like this. You can see that Danielle Smith is like attacking the cities, quote unquote. And why would people vote for something that is contradictory to what they want? Which baffles me, to be honest.
Well, I
would
think
you
part of
vote?
there were a lot of people, and this is a voiced, defined strategy that was used in the 2023 election, where there were a lot of candidates who, when they were knocking doors, were straight up saying, "We're going to keep Danielle under control. We're going to be getting rid of her right away. Don't worry about Danielle. You know, I've been doing this for you for 4 years, and I'll continue to represent you in Rena." So there was a lot of minimization of the Danielle Smith influence in the run up, particularly with the door knockers. That's something that's been documented and established. So I think that there were a lot of people for, if they had interactions with door knockers, those interactions were, yeah, you don't have to worry about it. And I think that really minimized it for a lot of those voters. But again, I would argue that, you know, I think you're partially right. I think that there is, particularly in Southern Calgary, a cultural component that does lean, air quotes, conservative, whatever that means. And I mean, I would refer everybody back to our last episode where we said what you think is conservative is not actually conservative anymore. But there's a cultural leaning that, well, I just vote conservative because that's what I do. It's that whole paint a rock blue, and people in South Calgary and in Alberta will vote for it. But in order to get people out of that, you have to give them a reason to. And I think that Danielle Smith has done a very good job of giving people a reason to look elsewhere. But I don't know that any other parties have done a commensurate job of saying, and this is where you should be looking. I think that, you know, you take a look at the I guess if you wanted to, could call it messaging from the Alberta party, and it's like once a month, and not engaging in any way. You take a look at the messaging from the NDP, and they're doing a really great job of having a bunch of people announce they're running for leadership without running for leadership. But they've got to get through that leadership race and then completely redefine their brand and culture without Rachel. So there's not a lot. If you're shopping around, there's not a lot that goes, oh yeah, that's what I want. There's a lot that goes, oh, we're screwed. And so I can understand why people would revert to what they believe is their normal. Do I think it's the best choice? For sure not. That's why I host this show. But the reality is that's where we are. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So when Danielle Smith sticks to her script, she'll get her point out very good. She'll have be calm. She'll be condensed. She'll be very good on the stage, and that's probably what, I don't know if this got out to voters. Probably did. And I don't live in Calgary. I live in the in the outer cities. Her sticking to the script probably got out to the voters as, oh, maybe, you know, she's not as crazy as you think. But when those reporters start asking questions like that interview on CTV Calgary, you know, she can get a bit the iffy.
Oh,
You
to
know what
say
I
the
mean?
least, man. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for tapping in tonight.
Yeah, no problem.
And hope we see you around these parts again.
Yeah. I don't come on often, but it's nice. It's nice when I do
Yeah.
listen to these podcasts.
Cool. Well, thanks, man. I'm gonna wrap up the evening there because it's we're coming up to the 2 hour mark, and I try to put a hard cap on that. But I want to say a big thank you to everybody who listened live tonight. I want to say a big thank you to everybody, especially in the chat. I love the call-in section of the show because that's where I get to put the chat on, and I can multitask and do both. I can't do that when we're doing the actual segments, but I love the call-in section because I get to go through the chat a little bit. So huge thank you to everybody who's up in the chat today. I want to say a big thank you to, as always, all of our Patreon sponsors, and I'll plug it one more time. If you like the kind of content that we produce here, you can sign up to be a Patreon sponsor at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab. We give swag sometimes, so, you know, you get stuff, as well as the warm, fuzzy feeling that comes from being able to tell the politician that you like the least that you support the breakdown, because that will probably make them just a little bit crazy. And that's it. If you're listening to the audio version of the podcast after the live show, then we would ask that you also think about leaving a review, the little stars thinger I hear the 5 stars is the one that you wanna click on, and then use some nice words, and like and share, as the kids say. Smash that subscribe button, as the kids say. And we'll see you back here next week. We are in the process of starting to rebook all of our interviews, so our Patreon supporters will get early access to those. We've got a couple I'm hoping that pan out that I'm pretty excited for. So keep an eye out for those. And other than that, as always, especially with the weather challenges that we're having right now, take care. I mean, poor Tammy it sounds like she lived through a country song this week. So take care of yourselves. And as always, keep the conversation going.